The folded medical card slipped from Claire's sleeve just as Vincent's gunman closed in. For one suspended second, nobody moved. The alley behind St. Mercy Clinic smelled like bleach, rain-soaked cardboard, and old fryer grease from the diner on the corner. Claire stood with her back to the brick wall, her coat hanging off one shoulder, one hand pressed hard against her ribs where blood had already soaked through 2 layers of fabric. In front of her, Vincent Moretti's men formed a hard line of black wool and steel, waiting for the smallest signal from the man at their center. Vincent never heard the card hit the pavement, but he saw it. A white rectangle against dirty concrete, laminated, worn at the corners. Important enough that Claire, a woman who owned almost nothing, had hidden it inside her sleeve instead of her pocket. One of the gunmen bent to grab it. Claire moved first, not fast enough to outrun them, not strong enough to fight them, but with a desperation that made even armed men hesitate. She lunged, caught the guard's wrist, and nearly collapsed with the effort. Her eyes flashed up to Vincent's face, not pleading, not theatrical, just fierce, as if this single object mattered more than her own safety. That was what stopped him. For 3 years, Vincent had lived inside silence. No music, no gunshots, no lies delivered in honeyed voices. He had learned to read mouths, shoulders, hesitation, guilt. He trusted motion more than language now, and Claire's body had just told him something unmistakable. That card was the truth. Vincent lifted one hand. His men froze. The alley went still in the way dangerous places do, when violence is not gone, only waiting. He stepped forward himself, polished shoes darkening in a shallow puddle, and picked up the card before anyone else could touch it. Claire tried to straighten, but pain folded her in half. He caught that too, not with his hands, with his eyes, with the cold precision that had made men fear him long before he lost his hearing. The card was from St. Jude Memorial Hospital, neurology, trauma wing, dated 3 years earlier, the same night a bullet in a car crash had taken his hearing and nearly taken his life. Vincent's thumb paused over one line highlighted in faded yellow marker. Emergency recipient transfer authorization. Under it, another name, a child's name. His eyes narrowed, then lower. Signed witness, Claire Bennett. The room inside him, the locked, silent room where those missing hours had rotted for years, shifted for the first time. Claire saw him reading and pushed herself off the wall. She was trembling now, not from fear, but from decision. She touched her own throat, then pointed at him, then at the card, then made a small circling motion over her temple, asking the question he had seen doctors ask before. Do you remember? He didn't. Not enough. But he understood one thing with brutal clarity. Claire had been there the night his life was destroyed, and she had hidden that proof while men around him lied for years. A black SUV rolled into the mouth of the alley. Too smooth. Too deliberate. Vincent turned before his men did. Tinted windows. No signal. Wrong plates. Threat. His captain reached for his weapon, but Vincent was already moving. Steel flashed under the alley light, not from a gunshot, but from the split-second discipline of men who had survived by reading danger before it spoke. The black SUV rolled forward another 3 feet, engine low and predatory, its headlights cutting Claire into a pale shape beside the brick wall. Rainwater trembled in a pothole. One of Vincent's guards moved to shield him out of instinct. Vincent stopped him with a single raised hand. For 3 years, silence had trained him into something colder than fear. He could not hear the tires, the engine, the doors, or the breath of the men inside. But he saw timing. He saw posture. He saw the driver keep the wheel too steady. He saw the back passenger lean just enough to signal a coordinated exit. This was not a warning. It was an extraction. Run. The word never reached his own ears, but Claire read it on his mouth and staggered backward. The rear doors burst open. 2 men came out first, not shooting, not yet. That was what made Claire's blood go cold. They were reaching for her. Not Vincent. Her. The alley collapsed into motion. His captain lunged toward the first attacker. A second guard drew his weapon. Vincent did not go for the nearest threat. He went straight for Claire, cutting across the wet pavement with brutal precision as one of the men grabbed her coat sleeve and yanked hard enough to tear the fabric at the shoulder. For a homeless woman ignored by half the city, she moved with startling instinct. Claire dropped her weight, twisted out of the ruined coat, and slammed the metal tin she carried against the attacker's wrist. The object clattered to the ground, spilling old receipts, a cracked lighter, and a folded piece of yellowed paper she had kept hidden for years. The man saw it. His eyes changed. That single glance told Vincent more than any confession could. The paper mattered. One of the gunmen shouted something Vincent could not hear. Claire could. Her face drained. "They want the note," she gasped, scrambling for it on her knees. Not me. The note. The room of his mind, dark for years, lit with sudden geometry. If men were willing to expose themselves in his territory over one scrap of paper, then whatever Claire had carried out of that ruined night was not sentimental. It was lethal. A shot fired. Vincent never heard it. He saw the spark against the muzzle and the burst of brick dust beside Claire's head. His expression did not change, but something inside him turned absolute. He caught her by the arm, dragged her behind a rusted dumpster, and reached for the fallen paper at the same time. Another round hit the metal with a hard shudder he felt through his palm. Cold. Calculated. Close. If that note disappeared, the last honest trail back to the night he lost his hearing would vanish with it. He looked at Claire. She shook her head violently and pointed, not at the attackers, but at the SUV. There. A third man remained inside. Not muscle. Not a shooter. A watcher. That changed everything. Comment below if you've ever seen truth make powerful men panic. Vincent snatched the note first, shoved it inside his jacket, then made a decision none of his men expected. Cold rain clung to the windshield in trembling lines, turning the parked SUV into a dark mirror that reflected alley light, brick, and fear. Inside that blur sat the third man Claire had pointed at, clean coat, pale gloves, the stillness of someone who did not fight because other men bled for him. Vincent did not waste another second on the wounded driver sprawled near the curb or the panicked scramble of his own men securing the scene. His hand cut through the air once, sharp and final. Two soldiers moved toward the vehicle. Another dragged the shooter aside. The alley tightened around that silent command. The watcher saw the order and bolted. He burst out of the passenger side with a folder pressed under one arm, trying to cut through the mouth of the alley before Vincent's men could close it. But speed failed where preparation had ruled for years. One bodyguard hooked his shoulder. Another slammed him against the hood hard enough to dent metal. Papers fanned into the wet night like startled birds. No gun. No bravado. Just terror, raw, unhidden, almost insulting in a man dressed that well. Claire flinched at the impact, then did something none of them expected. Instead of shrinking back, she lurched forward and grabbed Vincent's sleeve with both hands. Not to beg, to stop him. Her fingers trembled against the black wool of his coat. Her mouth opened, but whatever sound lived inside her came broken and breathless. Then her eyes lifted to his face fully, and the color drained from her own as if the rain had washed it away. Not fear of a Mafia boss. Not fear of violence. Recognition. A memory had struck her harder than the men ever could. Vincent turned toward her, irritation already rising, but it stalled the instant he saw the look in her eyes. He had spent 3 years living inside silence, reading jaws, hands, shoulders, the twitch before betrayal, the lie before a trigger pull. And this was not the expression of a stranger caught in the wrong sweep. This was the shock of someone seeing a ghost walk toward her in a living man's body. She touched her own ear, then pointed at him. Then, with a shaking hand, traced a line down the side of her head, just above the neck. Fast, urgent, specific. The room inside him went still. Not a room made of sound, but of memory. Rain. Glass. A burst of white pain. The final seconds before darkness had swallowed the world that used to speak to him. One of Vincent's captains stepped in, misunderstanding everything. He yanked Claire backward by the arm. Rough, impatient, eager to restore order after too many surprises in one night. She stumbled hard, her shoulder striking the brick wall. The folder the watcher had dropped split open nearby, and photographs slid across the pavement into the gutter. Vincent moved before the captain could touch her again. His hand clamped around the man's wrist with such force the captain's face changed instantly. No shout was needed. No warning could have been clearer. Vincent shoved him off Claire and fixed him with a stare cold enough to empty a church. Leave her. The command came in sign, clean, brutal, unmistakable. The captain froze mid-breath. Around them, every man in Vincent's circle felt the shift and abated at once. The disrespect was over. The room went silent, even out in the rain. Rain still clung to the estate windows when Vincent's men brought Claire through the front hall, past the marble floor and the silent portraits that watched like judges. Her shoes were soaked, her coat dark with water, but she did not shrink under the chandeliers the way most people did. The captain stayed behind, jaw tight, while two guards waited by the door as if the air itself had become dangerous. Vincent studied her from the edge of the room, one hand resting on the back of a leather chair, the other still tense from the command he had signed a minute earlier. He expected fear. He expected pleading. Instead, Claire lifted her chin and looked past the guards, past the gold fixtures, straight at him with a calm that felt almost impossible. The silence between them grew thick enough to hear. "Give me a room. And paper." The request landed harder than a shout. One of the men frowned, unsure whether to laugh or obey. Vincent's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. He nodded once, and the guards moved at once, not because they understood her, but because he had chosen to listen. Claire was taken to a smaller study near the West Hall, where the rain tapped softly at the glass and the lamplight turned the desk into a square of gold. No one offered comfort. No one offered a bargain. They waited for her to speak, to explain why a homeless woman had dared walk into his house and stare down armed men as if she belonged there. Instead, she sat down, took the pen from the desk, and asked for nothing but silence. Vincent entered a moment later without announcement. He did not stand over her. He did not threaten her. He watched as she wrote one name on the page, slow and careful, as if the ink itself carried weight. His face changed. The name belonged to a man Vincent had not seen in years, a man buried so deep in old business that even the men around him would not speak it aloud. Claire did not look up. She placed the pen down with steady fingers and folded her hands in her lap. "You know him," Vincent signed, his movements clipped and precise. Claire's eyes met his. "I know what he took." That was all she gave him. The room tightened around the words. One of Vincent's men shifted near the door, confused by the sudden shift in power. This was no longer about an alley, no longer about a rescue, no longer about who had been humiliated in public. The danger had moved inward, into memory, into trust, into the part of Vincent's life he had kept buried because surviving had always required forgetting. He looked at the name again, and for the first time that night, the quiet felt heavier than violence. Then Claire did something no one expected. She turned the page over and wrote a second line beneath it, a date, then a location, then a single symbol Vincent recognized from an old private ledger locked away in his office safe. His breath caught. The woman in the chair had not asked for mercy. She had not come to be saved. She had come with proof. Vincent stood still for a long beat, then slowly signed for everyone else to leave. The guards hesitated. The hesitation lasted only a second, but in a house like Vincent's, a second could mean loyalty or death. Then the guards obeyed. Leather saws whispered across marble. The doors shut with a soft, expensive click, and the hall outside fell away until only rain remained, ticking against the tall windows like nervous fingers. Warm light from the chandelier spilled over the library's dark wood shelves and polished desk, catching on the silver scar that ran just below Vincent's ear. He did not sit. He stood beside the fire with that still, disciplined posture men built when pain had lived in them too long. Across from him, Claire reached slowly into the torn lining of her coat. No one rushed her. That was the strangest part. From a hidden seam near her ribs, she pulled out a small oilcloth packet, yellowed at the folds and tied with faded black thread. It was so ordinary it almost looked ridiculous in a room guarded by imported whiskey, loaded guns, and old money. Yet the instant Vincent saw the care with which she held it, something in his expression hardened. Not anger. Recognition without understanding. Claire set the packet on the desk between them. Then she looked at him, raised one hand, and signed with rough but careful fingers. Kept dry. 3 years. The room seemed to tighten. Vincent stepped forward, every movement precise. He untied the thread and unfolded the cloth layer by layer, as if handling evidence from his own grave. Inside lay 3 things: a shattered hearing aid case burned black along one edge, a brass cufflink stamped with the same symbol Claire had written on the page, and a folded scrap of blood-stained paper so brittle it looked ready to fall apart in his hands. His jaw locked. The hearing aid case was his. Not one like his. His. 3 years earlier, on the night the blast stole sound from his world, he had been wearing a prototype receiver hidden under his collar, designed to amplify conversation in crowded rooms. Only 4 people had known about it. Only men from his inner circle had access to the tailor who fitted the wire and to the doctor who calibrated the frequency. After the explosion, that device had vanished along with every official report from the scene. Claire pointed first to the burned case, then to the cufflink. Her eyes steady. Vincent picked up the cufflink and turned it beneath the lamp. The symbol engraved into the brass was small, almost invisible unless the light hit it right. A split serpent wrapped around a vertical line. It was not a family crest. It was a private accounting mark, used years ago in one hidden ledger to identify off-book transfers approved by only one branch of his organization. Internal movement. Internal theft. Internal permission. Inside. His throat moved once. Claire touched the final scrap of paper and motioned for him to open it carefully. He did. On the stained fragment was half a shipping invoice, scorched at the edges, the date matching the night he lost his hearing. The listed delivery was fake construction material sent to the warehouse where the attack happened. But the billing authorization in the corner was real. A signature code. Vincent knew it instantly because he had invented it himself as a safeguard no outsider could copy. The order for the delivery had not come from an enemy. Cold lamplight pooled across the desk, turning the scorched invoice fragment into something that looked less like paper than evidence dug out of a grave. Rain whispered against the tall windows. The mansion, which had spent years obeying Vincent's silence, seemed to hold its breath with him now. Across from that light, Claire sat rigid in a straight-backed chair, both hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea, as if warmth itself had become something she no longer trusted. The code in the corner had already changed the shape of the night. It meant the trap at the warehouse had been opened from inside his own walls. Not by a rival family, not by some reckless street crew chasing cash. By someone who knew his private safeguards, his shipment routes, his habits, and the exact warehouse where he would stand when the blast took his hearing and nearly took his life. But this time, Vincent did not move first. Claire reached into the torn lining of her coat with the caution of someone handling a live wire, then pulled out a flattened plastic sleeve clouded by age and rain. Inside it was a Polaroid, faded at the corners, the colors sickly with time. She slid it across the desk with trembling fingers. In the photograph, a loading bay glowed under a single security light. 2 black SUVs were backed toward the dock. 3 men stood beside a crate marked as steel supports for a construction site. One of them had his face turned half away. That was enough. Vincent's expression did not change, but his stillness sharpened. The man in the half-profile was Roman Vale, his current chief of operations, the one who had stood closest to him for the last 3 years. The one who interpreted meetings, guarded schedules, and controlled who came near him after the world went silent. In the picture, Roman looked younger, leaner, less polished. But the hand was the same. A ring with a square black stone. Vincent had seen it every day. Claire swallowed hard before she spoke, forcing the words out like they hurt on the way up. She had not gone to that warehouse by accident. 3 years ago, before the streets, before the shelters, before hunger hollowed her voice into a whisper, she cleaned offices in the industrial district on the night shift. Her younger brother, Daniel, worked delivery jobs under the table. That night he had called her in a panic, saying he had been paid to move a package and something felt wrong. He told her the dock number, then the line cut dead. She went looking for him. The memory returned to her in pieces, jagged and bright. Diesel in the air. Men shouting over the sound of a reversing truck. A crate already opened. Coils of wire where no wire should have been. She had hidden behind stacked pallets and watched Roman argue with another man she could not name, watched cash change hands, watched Daniel shoved to the ground when he tried to back out. Then headlights washed the loading bay white. Vincent had arrived. Claire's hands began to shake harder. She said she saw the moment the sequence began, a false delivery signed into the system, Vincent stepping out to inspect it himself, Daniel trying to warn someone, and Roman striking him across the mouth to shut him up. She remembered the blast not as sound, but as force. Rain pressed harder against the mansion windows, a thin silver veil over black glass, while the office held the kind of stillness that made every breath feel supervised. The scorched invoice lay between them under the desk lamp, its edges curled like burned skin, and the coded signature on it had changed everything. Not because it proved an enemy had entered Vincent's world, but because it proved the order had been born inside it. Claire sat rigid in the leather chair across from him, both hands wrapped around themselves as if she could stop the memory from leaking out through her fingers. She had given him the blast, the loading bay, Roman's hand, Daniel's fear. Now there was only one question left between them, and it was uglier than the rest. Why had she vanished? Vincent did not sign the question right away. His eyes stayed on her face, steady and unreadable, letting the silence do what pressure often did better than threats. The side of his jaw tightened once. Then his hands moved. Why run if you knew the truth? The words formed in the air between them, clean and spare. Claire looked down at the burn mark on the paper, and something in her posture folded inward. For a moment she seemed to drift far from the room, back to alley cold, shelter lines, damp cardboard, and the long humiliation of becoming invisible one layer at a time. When she finally spoke, her voice came out rough. Because Daniel found me first. The room seemed to contract. She said he came to her 2 nights after the explosion, his lips still split, his face yellowing with bruises, carrying a small metal capsule no bigger than a lipstick tube. He had been shaking so badly he could barely get the words out. He told her Roman knew he had tried to interfere. He told her the records inside Vincent's own system would be cleaned before sunrise. And he told her that if anyone in the house saw him protecting a kitchen worker, they would understand exactly what he had done. Claire had not mattered to powerful men before that night. The second Daniel handed her the capsule, she became a loose end. Inside, she whispered, tapping the scorched fragment, was the rest of it. Shipping logs, internal authorizations, a copy key. He said if anything happened to him, I had to keep it from Roman. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. They had dried up somewhere in the first winter. Daniel had hidden her before, she said. Cash under a loose brick behind the old church on Mercer. A bus ticket under another name. A number to call if she made it to Baltimore. But Roman's people had found the church by morning. Daniel disappeared that same day. Claire never saw him again. After that, every shelter bed was a risk, every public clinic a list, every kind stranger a possible set of eyes reporting back to the wrong man. So she did what hunted people often did when they had no weapons, no lawyer, no family, and no proof anyone powerful wanted to hear. She made herself disappear so completely that the world stopped seeing her as human. A laundry room became a bed for 1 month. A freeway underpass became winter. Soup kitchens. Side doors. Men who laughed when she asked to sweep for food. Under the lamp. The ruined invoice no longer looked like a scrap salvaged from fire. It looked like bait. The idea came to life in Vincent's face with a coldness Claire had not seen before. Not even in the dining room, when men with clean hands had treated her like dirt on the carpet. He stood at the edge of the desk, broad shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the coded mark branded into the paper. And then he turned that stare toward Matteo, the only captain left in the house whose loyalty had not yet cracked in public. Vincent signed 3 sharp commands in the air. Lock the east wing. Call every senior man to the lower counting room. Tell no one why. Matteo hesitated only once, glancing at Claire. Vincent noticed. His next motion was slower, harder. Guard her yourself. The room went still. Claire felt it then. Not safety, not yet, but wait. For 3 years she had lived as something people looked through. A woman beneath notice. A woman fit to be brushed aside, lied to, starved, shoved from doorways, and forgotten by morning. Now the most feared man in the city was restructuring his own fortress around the fact that she had spoken. The shift was so severe it made her knees weak. Roman will smell a trap, Matteo said. Vincent's answer came in one brutal line of sign. Good. Let him come armed. The lower counting room sat beneath the mansion like a buried vault, all poured concrete, old steel doors, and light so white it made every face look guilty. Men filed in by rank and habit, expensive shoes striking the floor in clipped echoes, irritation on some faces, caution on others. Roman arrived last, dressed in charcoal wool, anger hidden beneath polished charm. Beside him came 2 soldiers Vincent recognized from the old shipping routes, men who had survived too many cleanups to still believe in coincidence. At the center of the table lay the scorched invoice in a clear evidence sleeve. No one touched it. Vincent did not take the head seat. He stood instead at the far side of the room, where every man could see him clearly. Silence had been his prison for 3 years, but tonight he used it like a blade. He looked to Mateo, who gave the signal. The wall monitor flickered on. Security records, gate logs, warehouse entry stamps, copies drawn from archives Roman had assumed were dead. Then came the final image, grainy, damaged, but intact enough. A false delivery accepted at the North Yard. Daniel in the frame, turning, mouth open, trying to stop something. Roman stepping in fast, his hand slamming across Daniel's face. A murmur broke across the room like a crack in glass. Roman laughed too quickly. Old footage means nothing. Claire, standing under guard near the steel door, lifted her chin. Her coat was still damp from rain. Her shoes were split at the sides. Yet when she spoke, every man in the room looked at her. It means he was there before the blast, she said. And Daniel was trying to stop it. Roman turned on her with a smile so thin it looked sick. You expect this room to trust a homeless beggar? For a second, old shame moved through her by memory alone. Soup lines, closed doors, men who enjoyed humiliation because it cost them nothing. For a second, old shame moved through her by memory alone. Soup lines, closed doors, men who enjoyed humiliation because it cost them nothing. Then Claire lifted her chin. She did not look at Roman. She looked at Vincent. The office lamp carved hard planes into his face, turning his silence into something colder than rage. Rain crawled down the black windows behind him, and the men around the desk held themselves with the rigid caution of people standing too close to an open grave. Claire's fingers tightened around the scorched invoice. Her knuckles were pale. Her coat was still damp, but her eyes were steady now, not pleading, not shrinking. She stepped to Vincent's side and laid the burned paper beside his hand. Then she reached into the inner seam of her coat and pulled out one more thing she had hidden all these years. A small brass hearing aid shell, warped by heat, blackened at one edge, with a scratched maker's mark on the back. Roman's face changed first. Just a flicker. But Vincent saw it. Claire spoke softly, and the room leaned in to catch every word. She told them she had found it on the warehouse floor the night of the blast, tangled in blood and plaster near Vincent's fallen body. She had kept it because she knew it mattered, even when she had nothing else to keep. Days later, when she returned to look for Daniel, the place had already been scrubbed. Men were hauling out records. Fire damage where there should have been rubble. A cleanup too careful for an accident. And on the shell, under the soot, was the same shipping mark burned into the invoice. Daniel's company, not as buyer, as witness. Roman let out a dry laugh that broke in the middle. That proves nothing. Vincent didn't move. He only raised one hand. Leave. One of Roman's own captains, a thick-necked man named Sal, hesitated. Vincent's gaze shifted to him, flat as steel. Sal looked at the shell, then at Roman, then dropped his gun on the Persian rug with a dead, final thud. Another man followed. Then a third. In less than 10 seconds, Roman was standing with only 2 loyalists behind him, and even they looked half gone already. The room went silent. Roman's smile peeled away. You think Daniel was innocent? He snapped. He was weak. He wanted out. He was going to hand your routes to the feds and walk away clean. Claire's breath caught. Vincent's expression did not change, but something old and brutal darkened in his eyes. Roman mistook that stillness for uncertainty and kept talking, because guilty men often mistake silence for safety. He said Daniel had learned about a shipment hidden inside medical relief crates. Children's antibiotics used to move weapons and cash. Daniel had threatened to expose all of it unless Vincent shut the pipeline down. Roman said Vincent had refused. Said Daniel had set the meeting at the warehouse. Said the bomb was only supposed to kill Daniel. Then Roman made the mistake that ended him. He wasn't supposed to drag you close enough to lose your ears. Claire froze. Vincent did too, but only for the width of one breath. Roman heard himself too late. Not Daniel. Not an accident. Not a rival crew. Roman. The truth settled over the office like ash. 3 years of darkness.